Marcus Thompson had always been the type of person who pushed boundaries. At 28, the American software developer from Seattle had a reputation among his friends for being the guy who would do anything for a laugh or a viral video. His social media accounts were filled with pranks, stunts, and challenges that often left his followers both entertained and slightly concerned for his well-being. When Marcus decided to take his first vacation to London in 3 years, he saw it as the perfect opportunity to create content that would finally make him internet famous. He had been planning this trip for months, researching all the popular tourist spots and thinking of creative ways to make his visit memorable. The Tower of London, Big Ben, and Buckingham Palace were all on his list, but it was the famous royal guards that truly captured his imagination. Marcus had spent hours watching YouTube videos of tourists trying to interact with the stoic soldiers. He laughed at the compilation videos showing people making faces, telling jokes, and even dancing in front of the guards, trying desperately to get any kind of reaction. Most of the attempts were harmless and unsuccessful, with the guards maintaining their legendary composure. But Marcus was convinced he could be different. He had something special planned. The morning of his encounter, Marcus woke up in his cramped London hotel room with excitement coursing through his veins. He had spent the previous evening fine-tuning his plan and charging his phone to ensure he could capture every moment. His strategy was simple but bold. He would gradually escalate his attempts to break the guards' composure, starting with harmless jokes and building up to more elaborate performances. As he walked through the streets of London toward Buckingham Palace, Marcus rehearsed his routine in his head. He had prepared a series of impressions, jokes, and even brought along some props he thought might do the trick. The weather was perfect, a crisp autumn morning with clear skies that would be ideal for filming. Tourism was at its peak, which meant he would have a good-sized audience to witness his moment of triumph. Marcus arrived at the palace gates around 10 in the morning, joining the growing crowd of tourists who had gathered to catch a glimpse of the famous guards. He positioned himself strategically, ensuring he had a clear view of one particular guard who stood at attention near the main entrance. The soldier was tall and imposing, dressed in the traditional red tunic and black bearskin hat that made the royal guards instantly recognizable around the world. For the first few minutes, Marcus simply observed, studying the guard's behavior and looking for any signs of weakness in his composure. The soldier stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed straight ahead, seemingly oblivious to the dozens of tourists taking photos and chattering excitedly around him. This was exactly the challenge Marcus had been hoping for, a worthy opponent for his planned performance. Marcus began his performance subtly, starting with what he considered his warm-up routine. He positioned his phone on a nearby railing, ensuring it would capture both him and the guard in the frame. With the camera recording, he began with some basic comedy, telling jokes loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear, hoping to catch the guard's attention or at least get a smile. "Hey there, soldier," Marcus called out cheerfully, waving enthusiastically at the motionless figure. "I bet you're wondering what's under that big fuzzy hat of yours. Is it just hair, or are you hiding snacks up there?" A few tourists chuckled, but the guard remained as still as a statue, his expression unchanging beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. Undeterred by the lack of response, Marcus escalated his efforts. He pulled out his first prop, a small rubber chicken that he had bought specifically for this moment. He began making the chicken dance in front of the guard, adding silly sound effects and voices as if the toy were trying to have a conversation with the soldier. The absurdity of the situation drew more attention from other tourists, who began gathering around to watch the impromptu show. "Come on, mate," Marcus continued, his confidence growing as his audience expanded. "Even the Queen probably laughs at rubber chickens. You can't tell me this isn't at least a little bit funny." He made the chicken do elaborate dance moves, complete with dramatic dips and spins, all while maintaining a running commentary about the guard's supposed thoughts and feelings. The crowd around Marcus was growing larger and more engaged. People were pulling out their own phones to record the spectacle, and he could hear whispered conversations in various languages as international tourists tried to understand what the energetic American was attempting to accomplish. Some laughed openly at his antics, while others seemed more interested in watching the guard to see if there would be any reaction. For his next act, Marcus had prepared what he considered his secret weapon: celebrity impressions. He had always been talented at mimicking famous voices, and he launched into an elaborate routine featuring everyone from Arnold Schwarzenegger to Mickey Mouse, all supposedly having conversations with the royal guard about British culture, tea, preferences, and the weather. "I'll be back for some fish and chips," Marcus declared in his best Austrian accent, striking bodybuilder poses while facing the guard. He followed this immediately with a high-pitched Mickey Mouse voice. "Oh boy. Oh boy, this guard sure is quieter than Goofy on a Tuesday." The crowd's laughter was becoming more sustained, and Marcus felt like he was truly hitting his stride. But still, the guard remained completely motionless. Not even a twitch of acknowledgement crossed his face. His eyes stayed fixed on the distance, and his breathing remained so controlled that he barely seemed human. Marcus had to admit, he was impressed by the level of professionalism, but he was far from ready to give up. If anything, the challenge was making him more determined to succeed, where countless others had failed. As his performance entered its third phase, Marcus decided it was time to bring out his most elaborate props. From his backpack, he produced a small speaker, a feather boa, and what appeared to be a miniature disco ball that caught the sunlight and scattered rainbow reflections across the palace courtyard. The growing crowd of spectators pressed closer, sensing that the American tourist was building toward something even more spectacular. Marcus draped the feather boa around his shoulders and began an impromptu dance routine, complete with moves he claimed were inspired by famous British musicians. He moonwalked like Michael Jackson while singing "God Save the Queen" in an exaggerated British accent, then switched to air guitar movements while belting out Queen's "We Will Rock You." The miniature disco ball spun in his hand, creating a dazzling light show that drew even more attention from passing tourists. "This one's for you, Your Majesty," Marcus shouted, launching into what he called his royal rock opera. He combined dramatic singing with interpretive dance, telling the story of a lonely guard who secretly dreamed of being a backup dancer for pop stars. His performance included elaborate costume changes using various items from his backpack: sunglasses, a fake mustache, and even a small Union Jack flag that he waved dramatically during his finale. The crowd had grown to nearly 50 people, with tourists from all over the world stopping their sightseeing to watch the unexpected entertainment. Children giggled and pointed while their parents recorded videos, likely planning to share them with friends back home. Marcus felt like he was in his element, performing for an international audience right in front of one of the most famous landmarks in the world. But what impressed him most was the guard's unwavering dedication to his duty. Despite the growing spectacle, the music, the lights, and the increasingly loud audience, the soldier remained perfectly composed. His posture was flawless, his gaze steady, and his expression completely neutral. Marcus had to respect the level of training and discipline it must have taken to achieve such complete self-control. However, Marcus was not ready to admit defeat. He had one more level of escalation planned, something he was sure would at least earn him a glance or a slight smile. He pulled out his phone and began filming himself giving a mock interview, pretending to be a reporter covering the ongoing stalemate between American tourist and British guard. "This is Marcus Thompson reporting live from Buckingham Palace, where we're witnessing an unprecedented battle of wills," he announced in his best news anchor voice. The Royal Guard continues to maintain his position despite facing the most ridiculous performance in palace history. Experts are baffled by his superhuman levels of patience and professionalism. He turned the camera toward the guard and began asking mock interview questions, pausing dramatically for responses that never came. "Sir, How do you feel about rubber chickens? What's your opinion on disco balls? Do you prefer dancing tourists or singing tourists? Each question was delivered with increasing theatrical flair, and Marcus even cupped his ear as if straining to hear the guard's whispered responses. The audience was thoroughly entertained, but Marcus was beginning to realize that he might have met his match. This guard was demonstrating a level of composure that seemed almost superhuman, and Marcus was starting to wonder if there was anything that could break through that professional exterior. Marcus decided to take his performance to what he considered the ultimate level. He had been building up to this moment throughout his entire routine, and now felt confident enough with his audience to attempt something truly outrageous. He announced to the crowd that he was going to attempt the impossible, getting the guard to break character through sheer persistence and creativity. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus declared with the confidence of a seasoned performer, "prepare to witness history in the making." He pulled out his final prop, a small magic kit he had purchased the day before, complete with colorful scarves, a deck of cards, and a plastic wand. His plan was to perform an elaborate magic show directly in front of the guard, reasoning that everyone loves magic, and surely even the most disciplined soldier would be curious about a good trick. Marcus began with simple card tricks, dramatically, shuffling and flourishing the deck, while providing constant commentary about the guard's supposed amazement at his magical abilities. He pulled scarves from his sleeves with theatrical gasps of surprise, as if he himself was shocked by the magic he was creating. The crowd was enjoying the show, but the guard remained as motionless as ever, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the growing spectacle. Frustrated but not defeated, Marcus decided to cross a line he hadn't originally planned to cross. He stepped closer to the guard, moving within what most people would consider the soldier's personal space. The crowd's laughter began to quiet as they sensed the shift in energy. Marcus was now close enough to see the individual details of the guard's uniform, the precise alignment of his buttons, and the way his hands gripped his rifle with perfect positioning. "Come on, friend," Marcus said in a lower voice, though still loud enough for his phone to pick up. "I know you're human under there. Just a little smile, a wink, even just a blink that lasts a tiny bit longer than normal." He began making exaggerated facial expressions, hoping to demonstrate the kind of reaction he was hoping to see. He smiled widely, winked dramatically, and even tried crossing his eyes in what he thought was a hilarious display. But then Marcus made his crucial mistake. Emboldened by the crowd's attention and convinced that he was on the verge of a breakthrough, he reached out his hand as if to touch the guard's uniform. He didn't actually make contact, but his hand came within inches of the pristine red fabric of the tunic. To Marcus, this seemed like a harmless escalation of his performance, just another prop in his elaborate show. What Marcus didn't realize was that he had just crossed an invisible but very real boundary. The guard's training included specific protocols about maintaining security perimeters and protecting both himself and the royal property he was assigned to guard. While tourists were generally allowed to take photos and even speak to the guards from a respectful distance, approaching close enough to potentially make physical contact triggered an entirely different set of responses. The change in the guard's posture was subtle but immediate. While his face remained expressionless and his eyes stayed fixed ahead, there were small indicators that his level of alertness had shifted significantly. His grip on his rifle adjusted slightly, his breathing pattern changed, and though Marcus couldn't see it, the guard had already begun calculating distances and assessing potential threats, just as he had been trained to do. What happened next occurred so quickly that Marcus barely had time to process it. In one fluid motion that seemed to defy the laws of physics, the guard transformed from a motionless statue into a force of controlled power and precision. The soldier stepped forward with his left foot, brought his rifle across his body in a sharp horizontal movement, and delivered a command that cut through the air like a blade. "Stand back!" The voice that emerged from the guard was nothing like Marcus had imagined. It was deep, authoritative, and carried the full weight of military training and royal authority. The words echoed off the palace walls with such force that the entire crowd of spectators immediately fell silent and instinctively stepped backward. Even tourists who didn't speak English understood the universal language of command authority. Marcus found himself frozen in place, his hands still, extended toward where the guard's uniform had been just moments before. The soldier now stood at attention in a slightly different position, having moved with such speed and precision that Marcus's brain was still trying to catch up with what had just occurred. The guard's eyes, which had been gazing into the distance throughout the entire performance, were now focused directly on Marcus with an intensity that made the tourist's stomach drop. "Move away from the guard!" came a second command, this time from a different direction. Marcus turned his head to see that two additional guards were approaching from positions he hadn't even noticed before. They moved with the same fluid efficiency as the first guard, their boots striking the pavement in perfect synchronization as they closed the distance between themselves and the suddenly very nervous American tourist. The crowd that had been laughing and cheering just moments before was now backing away rapidly, creating a large circle around Marcus and the guards. Parents pulled their children closer, and the festive atmosphere of tourism evaporated instantly, replaced by a tension that Marcus could feel in his chest. Camera phones that had been recording his comedy routine were now capturing what looked like it might become a much more serious situation. Marcus raised both hands in the air, finally understanding that his harmless entertainment had crossed a line he never knew existed. "I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice much smaller than it had been during his performance. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to be funny." But the guards were not interested in his explanations or apologies. They had protocols to follow, and Marcus had triggered those protocols the moment he stepped too close to their post. One of the approaching guards spoke into a radio device that Marcus hadn't noticed before, using codes and terminology that the tourist couldn't understand, but that clearly indicated the situation was being reported to higher authorities. Marcus could hear the crackling response from the radio, though the words were too quiet and technical for him to make out. What he could understand was that his simple prank had now involved multiple levels of palace security. The original guard, who had remained silent and motionless for Marcus's entire 30-minute performance, maintained his position with the rifle held across his body in a ready position. His eyes never left Marcus, and the intensity of his gaze made it clear that he was prepared for any additional foolish decisions the tourist might make. This was no longer about entertainment or viral videos. This was about security, protocol, and the very serious business of protecting one of the most important buildings in the United Kingdom. Within minutes, palace security personnel arrived on the scene, followed by what appeared to be local police officers who had been patrolling the area. Marcus found himself surrounded by uniformed officials, all of whom seemed to take his breach of protocol very seriously. The carnival atmosphere of his performance had completely disappeared, replaced by the efficient, no-nonsense world of professional security operations. A security supervisor approached Marcus and calmly but firmly explained that approaching the royal guards in the manner he had demonstrated was not only disrespectful but potentially dangerous. The supervisor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but an unmistakably authoritative presence, took the time to educate Marcus about the role and responsibilities of the royal guards, explaining that they were not tourist attractions, but active military personnel with serious duties. "These soldiers are not performers," she explained patiently. "They are highly trained members of the military who are responsible for protecting some of the most important locations and people in our country. When you approach them in a threatening manner, even if you mean no harm, you force them to respond according to their training and protocols." Marcus learned that the royal guards are selected from elite military units and undergo extensive training not just in ceremonial duties, but in real security operations, crowd control, and threat assessment. The composure he had been trying to break wasn't just professional discipline. It was part of a complex security system designed to protect both the guards themselves and the royal properties they defended. The security supervisor continued to explain that while tourists were welcome to take photos and observe the guards from a respectful distance, approaching close enough to potentially make physical contact was considered a security breach that required immediate response. Marcus began to understand that his innocent prank had inadvertently tested security protocols that existed for very serious reasons. After nearly an hour of questioning, documentation, and what Marcus later described as the most educational conversation of my life, he was released with a formal warning and a requirement to delete any footage he had taken of the security response. The guards, he was told, were not angry or personally offended by his behavior, but they had responded exactly as they were trained to do when faced with a potential security situation. As Marcus walked away from Buckingham Palace, his props scattered. In his backpack and his confidence significantly diminished, he reflected on what had just occurred. He had set out to create viral content by breaking a guard's composure, but instead had learned a valuable lesson about respect, professionalism, and the difference between entertainment and duty. The experience changed Marcus's perspective on both travel and social media. He realized that his pursuit of internet fame had led him to treat real people as props in his personal entertainment show, without considering their dignity, their job responsibilities, or the larger context of their work. The royal guards weren't refusing to react to be difficult. They were doing their jobs with the seriousness and professionalism that their duties required. Marcus never posted the footage from that day, despite having captured most of his performance before the situation escalated. Instead, he spent the remainder of his London vacation learning about British history, visiting museums, and engaging with local culture in ways that were respectful and enriching rather than exploitative. He returned to Seattle with stories that were far more meaningful than any viral video could have been, and with a newfound appreciation for the dedication and professionalism of people who serve in roles that require them to put duty before personal comfort or recognition.